so we will get into it. We are going to start, as Lori mentioned, we're talking about K-12 literacy networks and state resources. And you've seen this disclaimer, just if you happen to miss it, we do not allow the use of generative AI tools, and any of those tools will be blocked. If it happens to be using those, if you would kindly turn those off, we would appreciate it. We are going to talk today about our two networks, the Early Literacy Network and the Literacy Implementation Network. And we are also going to talk about the K-12 standards guides and the district family resources. Starting off, I'll be talking about the Early Literacy Network, which is a large part of my work stream, and we'll look at the progression of the content for the 2025-2026 school year. So we have already had a few sessions, starting off with the virtual learning session in August, which is where we sort of launched for the year, and we did a deep dive into the new K2 standards guides. It proved very exciting and useful for teachers and leaders who did not know that these guides either existed or hadn't had access. And so it was a great way to start off the year. We moved into our regional convening where we focused on the standards guides and connecting those to the instructional practice guide for foundational skills, giving feedback to teachers based on these resources, and then providing targeted teacher support. And then we moved into another virtual learning session that really kind of extended that learning on teacher support. From that series, we create content that can be disseminated widely to teachers and leaders through an asynchronous module. So a lot of the content is very similar, but now it's something that can be provided to anyone who's not able to make it to those synchronous sessions. And so those asynchronous modules will be going out very soon. And that's sort of how a cycle works within the Early Literacy Network. And we have an upcoming cycle that's beginning in November, with a new regional convening and then virtual learning and asynchronous module again. A lot of that focus will be around writing instruction, which we know is a big need and often requested across the state. And then we will continue with progress monitoring, student work analysis, and things of that nature. And of course, all of this is subject to change at least somewhat, but that's generally what we predict for the year. And we're very excited about this content. We would love for you to join us. And so I will share those dates that may be a little bit easier to see. These are all of the dates. If you'd like to take a picture, you'll also have access to all of these materials on the website. But we would love for you to join us, for anyone you know to join us. And you should receive this information through the EPP newsletter, and you can access it through the instructional supervisor newsletter. You can also email me or any of our friends at TDOE, and they'll get you to the right person, and I can share information for registration on that. So please feel free to join us. We've already had some EPPs that have joined us, and we really appreciate the collaboration and discussion aligning our work from K-12 to higher ed. Now, we'll look back just briefly at our previous year, 2024-25. And so at the beginning of the year, we really dug into the foundational skills instructional practice guide. We connected that to intellectual preparation and teacher feedback, and understanding that instructional practice guide, the IPG, is really foundational to aligning all of our work and creating instructional coherence. So that led to the middle of the year where we talked about instructional coherence and how we can tighten everything up and make sure it aligns so that students are getting the best possible support and learning. And then moving from instructional coherence, we talked about student work analysis, access points, moving to productive struggle, and collecting student evidence. And I'll talk through some of this terminology in more detail. So with intellectual preparation, this is something you may or may not have heard from the state. We've talked about this terminology for several years now, but it really is a shift in mindset in education. And a lot of us, when we were learning to become teachers, we probably learned how to plan lessons, where we wrote out lessons or we found lessons, might be finding them online now. But what we have moved towards is high quality instructional materials where they're written very well, very coherently, have a strong scope and sequence. And so now we don't have to plan the lessons ourselves. We actually prepare around it. We internalize those lessons. And so intellectual preparation is an intentional sequence of learning that allows us to prepare for instruction through unit preparation, lesson preparation, and student work analysis. And you can see that continuous cycle. And instructional coherence, it's really just the systematic integration of instructional frameworks within a school or district setting, and it aims to deliver high quality support and services to all students. So when we coordinate our efforts, this will help accelerate learning and help each student reach their full potential. All of our instructional opportunities provided to students should be interconnected rather than isolated, and that will maximize effectiveness. And all of this happens through using our high quality instructional materials, using our intellectual preparation, and our IPG for strong workforce in classrooms. A few other points of terminology. So access points and instructional scaffolds. So access points are specific areas where students might require assistance within a lesson, points of struggle, and annotations within the high quality instructional materials that will provide teachers the ability to support students. Instructional scaffolds are the actual supports that are provided. So they're temporary and student specific, and they're designed to maximize access to grade level concepts and tasks. And it helps foster independent learning, competence, and confidence to allow students to grapple productively. And again, productive struggle. So it's more than just assigning hard work. We don't want our students to struggle for the sake of struggle. It's really about purposeful learning and giving them opportunities that are guided by the teacher. Teachers should create, facilitate, and monitor this process. It should be well designed and intentional. And it helps students to kind of grapple with challenges and persist through to mastery. This helps build neural pathways and produces myelin within the brain, supporting retention of new skills. And it signals a dopamine release for students, which makes it a natural motivator. So we want our students not to have it too easy, not too hard, just that intentional productive struggle. And so finally, for the Early Literacy Network, when we think about all of this content, all of this terminology, and we look at the asynchronous modules, all of the resources, really, you'll have access to these later in links that we provide. We want you to reflect and think, how might you utilize these modules and these materials to support your pre-service teachers? So let's take a minute just right now, and you can add that in the chat, just any ideas you have for how you might utilize these modules to support your pre-service teachers. I'm seeing some learning assignments. A great idea. So some of the content that may be useful is really focusing on intellectual preparation, because so much of what we learn is content focused, but once we get into a school, we may not have operated as a PLC or as a team. So that could be one strong way of using them. Oh, that's a great idea, Beth. So using them in practice with lesson preparation, students read and discuss their productive struggle articles. So again, you can pick and choose some of the content that's shared as well. It can be used all at once or in part. Substituting some existing lessons, that's great. Yes, that's great, Donna. Thank you for sharing that. So the modules typically take between 1 and 2 hours, depending on how quickly students move through them, and they can be broken up into sections. Thank you all for sharing. So we're going to move on to the next piece and look at the Literacy Implementation Network with Lena.
Good morning, everyone. I am Lena Thomas. I'm going to dive into the Literacy Implementation Network. We currently have 47 participating districts in the Literacy Implementation Network. These districts are organized into networks of 5 to 6 districts. The design allows districts to collaborate closely, share strategies, and learn from one another in a manageable, supportive structure. Within the 47 districts, we have identified 10 mentor districts. These are the districts with strong implementation practice already in place. Their role is to guide and support others. Together, these 47 districts form a learning community where they are building capacity, supporting implementation, and accelerating progress across the state. Alongside the network structure, we also have a strong set of supports for engagement and data tracking. On the engagement side, there are 3 consistent opportunities each month for learning and collaboration through learning webinars, community of practice meetings, and learning walks. On the data side, we focus on several key areas of instruction, like the instructional practice guide, district engagement, and instructional practice implementation. The Literacy Implementation Network is intentionally focused on elevating shared beliefs. So high quality instructional materials are a key part of academic strategy. Reaching a rigorous vision of teaching and learning requires both technical changes like systems and structures and adaptive, which shifts mindsets and daily practices. Attending to the vertical spine of knowledge, skills, and supports allows us to go deep and sustain the work. And lastly, monitoring progress and adjusting as we go is essential for continuous improvement. These beliefs keep us aligned and guide how we approach literacy implementation across the state of Tennessee. When we think about the levers that drive literacy strategy, there are 3 that rise to the top. The first is stakeholder investment. That means aligning everyone around a clear vision and ensuring there's buy-in for both the adoption and implementation of high-quality instructional materials. The second is building leader and teacher capacity. This goes beyond just training. It's about strengthening knowledge, skills, and mindsets and clarifying roles and responsibilities so that everyone knows how they contribute to the work. The third is aligning systems and structures. This includes intellectual preparation and professional learning communities that keep learning focused, as well as learning walks with feedback that create a cycle of reflection and growth. Together, these levers ensure that literacy strategy isn't just a plan on paper, but a living practice that leads to stronger outcomes for students. As we look at the HQIM cycle of continuous improvement, I want to highlight the core components in the middle of the cycle: lesson preparation and student work analysis. These serve as points that guide how we strengthen instruction and student outcomes over time. The first step is shared learning and setting focus. This is where we start with the vertical spine and vision setting. The district establishes a clear vision and priorities to ensure alignment across schools. Within this step, the HQIM framework is critical. It helps us focus on the quality of implementation. Priorities are not random, but instead rooted in school needs and IPG data, ensuring that what we target is both relevant and impactful. The second step, lesson preparation and practice. This is where the intellectual preparation tools really come into play. PLCs use the tools to collaborate, reflect, and grow in practice. Unit preparation is understanding student outcomes, what they are supposed to learn, while lesson preparation analyzes assessments, maps student struggles, plans strategic questions, identifies opportunities for collaboration, and consider how to differentiate content to meet diverse student needs. Analyzing and responding to student learning. Here we shift the focus to student work analysis. PLCs can serve as a place where teachers can dig into the work of all students, identifying strengths and gaps. Are students demonstrating growth? Are we seeing evidence that the strategies we planned are working? And lastly, end of cycle reflections. We take intentional time during the PLC meetings to reflect on work completed in the cycle. These reflections help us determine how to adjust future instruction and implementation. Without this step, we risk moving forward without learning from practices that were most effective or challenges that surfaced. So now that we've explored the components of the HQIM cycle, we're going to turn our attention to another critical component of the cycle, and that's ensuring that all stakeholders are engaged in the implementation of HQIM. So one of the components of acceleration for all is all stakeholders engaged in HQIM implementation. This is a whole system effort, and Tier 1 instruction is the foundation. For it to work, every educator must be part of the solution. District leaders, school leaders, and teachers. That means that we unsilo the work across roles, departments, and instructional supports. And we must fully embrace joint ownership of outcomes for all learners, especially those historically underserved. So let's take a moment just to clearly define the role of each stakeholder in this work. District leaders would help school leaders understand the framework, ensure they have the resources and structures needed by setting up the enabling conditions and guiding school teams in implementing the cycles of continuous improvement, continuous improvement at scale. School leaders create structures so grade level general education teachers are preparing with special education and ESL educators, monitor and support the success of collaborative planning meetings, and lead staff learning to build shared understanding of the improvement cycle and align practices across teams. And then there's educators that bring this work to life. Remember, we are not just talking about general education teachers, but special education and ESL educators, all in collaboration. Their role is to engage in collaborative lesson prep using deep intellectual protocols aligned with the IPG focus, use student work analysis to inform instructional decisions, and ultimately ensure that HQIM is being used effectively to support all students in accessing grade level content. So to close, I want to invite you all to participate in upcoming Acceleration for All convenings. You can find links to register in the Commissioner's Update for Directors or in the Instructional Insider newsletters. The links have also been included on this slide of the PowerPoint. And then here are just some resources that are available via websites. So the Acceleration for All is linked here where you can register, see what's available in your area. And then, of course, Best for All Central, where you can access the Intellectual Prep Hub. I am going to pass the baton over to Banks Lyons.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I am Banks Lyons, the manager for grades 9 through 12 ELA. And this morning, I'm going to be digging into a tool that the department created really to address kind of a gap that we had in terms of supporting stakeholders' understanding of standards. And also it became a critical tool, especially as we were implementing HQIM across districts, across the state, to really support stakeholders in understanding how those standards are embedded within those materials. And I'm going to go into this tool a little bit more in depth this morning. So to do that, I kind of want to take a step back and think about the actual standards themselves. So before we even get to the tool, to think about what are our standards like, right? So what is the design of our standards? What is the purpose of our standards? And there was a shift that happened pretty much over the past, I suppose, 10 years in kind of understanding the standards. We've moved away from an understanding of them as a set of skills, and we've moved toward an understanding of them as a set of tools to unlock meaning within text or to build knowledge from text. So these are things, so the standards are actually practices that the students use or tools that the students use to really engage at a deeper level with the text that they're reading in the classroom. So with that in mind, we also want to think about the design of the standards. So you may be familiar with the different strands of the standards. So we have the foundational literacy / language strand, we have the writing strand, we have speaking and listening, we have reading, and each of those strands are really designed to capture what we want students to do with ELA. And that is basically when they're reading texts, they're going to read about it, and then they're going to talk about it, and then they're going to write about it. And those strands reflect that, but they reflect it only if we understand them as interwoven together. And so because they're interwoven, we recognize that these standards are really not seen in isolation. And in fact, they spiral So they spiral as we go up through the grade levels, and they are scaffolded in rigor in that way. And that helps students as they move through each grade level to move toward a more sophisticated understanding of each standard. So based on that design, that presents some challenges, right? So some of the challenges of ELA, and we love to talk about the unique challenges to ELA as opposed to some other subject areas, but those are listed here. And basically, this is what the standards guides are designed to address, right? So the first one there is that we want teachers to be instructing with integrated and not isolated standards, and high quality materials really support that understanding and that shift that we've made. We also want teachers to be distinguishing between and among similar standards, and the standards guides are designed to address that. And we'll show some examples of that later on in my presentation. The guides are also designed to address any words or phrases within a given standard that might be confusing. You may understand the literal meaning of those phrases, but what that means in instruction can be something very unique or very specific, and the guides are designed to provide that. And then also another challenge is to discern the relationship between the grade level standard and the cornerstone standard. And I will talk about that relationship also a little bit more in depth here in a moment. And then the final challenge is to maintain a vision of the vertical progression of standards, so that the standards guides give each stakeholder a glimpse of what that standard looks like in the grade level before it gets to them and in the grade level that they're building toward. So thinking of the purpose of the K-12 standards guides, and this at every grade level, that these guides were designed as a resource. They were originally kind of really to be focused on instructional leaders and teachers, but we've really tried to broaden the explanation of how these can be used for all stakeholders, including parents. And they're really designed to capture two things, and that's the scope of each standard, which is each individual standard, what all is encompassed within that standard, and then also what is the level of rigor that students need to build toward within each of those standards. So we provide that core essential information for the standards, but what the guides are not designed to do, mainly because we want to keep them user-friendly, is they're not designed to be a comprehensive explanation of every single aspect of every single standard, because we want these guides to be used in the instructional preparation process. And to do that, they certainly need to be user-friendly and simply capture all of the essential information. The standards also build in complexity across grade levels in two ways, and this is reflected in the guides, that there's the scaffolding of the cornerstone within each grade level standard. But at times, you'll see that standards can be the same from grade level to grade level. And the key variable that changes there is the complex text, the grade level text that they're accessing. And that actually changes the rigor of the standard, because they're, again, thinking of the standard as a tool, that the tool that you use, the difficulty of the use of that tool changes with the difficulty of the text that it's being used with. So I am going to drop the link to our standards guides webpage. I just dropped it into the chat. If all of you would like to click on that link and take a look at that page, it will give you a pretty good understanding of all of the kind of resources that not only the standards guides themselves, but the resources that are attached to those guides, as well as an overview, as well as things to note regarding the design. Some of those pieces I've talked about today, but it's talked about a little bit more in depth on this webpage. And what I would encourage you to do in your own time is to bookmark this page so that you'll have it available. So when we make updates to this resource, you'll know where to go for any of those updates or any additional resources that we have. I would also encourage you to go toward the bottom of the page. If you'll scroll toward the bottom, you'll see that there are these buttons where you can access the standards guides by grade level, or you can access them by strands. And if you want to just click into any of those and open them, I'm going to talk about the design and kind of each of the pieces that are within a given standards guide. If you don't have access to them right now, it's fine. We'll be projecting something onto the screen to help guide you through that, but feel free to look at one yourself as well. So this is an example of a standard, right? So this is Foundational Literacy Standard 2 at the first grade level. And you can see at the top of the page, it gives the kind of the parent standard as well as the substandards A, B, C, and D. And then you have 3 columns that break down key components of the standard. And the first column is where we really go in depth in breaking down or unpacking that standard. And I'm going to talk about each of the types of notes that are included in that column here in a moment. You'll see in the second column there is a glossary. So this helps break down key terms or phrases that may need to be understood at a deeper level. And then in the third column, we have the standard as it's represented in sample classroom tasks. And I emphasize sample because standards can appear in materials in any number of ways. There can be any number of tasks that capture different elements or different levels of rigor within a standard, but these help provide stakeholders a snapshot of what it could look like in the classroom. And this, I think in particular, this column is helpful for administrators in walkthroughs when they're using the guide as an understanding of what the standard could appear like in the classroom. So thinking back in that unpacking the standard column, that was on the left-hand side, that first column. At the very top of that, and we'll take a look at that here in a moment, is an emphasis on the cornerstone standard. So as you can see, this is simply a snapshot of the actual standards themselves. So this is just the reading literature and reading informational strands for standard 2 and so I think that, and you can see it's grades 5 through 12 there, obviously goes all the way down to kindergarten. The standard itself builds in each of those grade levels toward the cornerstone standard. So the cornerstone standard is best understood as the heart of a given standard, or kind of what each of the grade level standards build toward. And because of that, the notes that we provide around the cornerstone standard appear a little bit differently in each grade band. And I'll talk about that in an upcoming slide. So as you can see there, this is where those notes appear. It is in the top left of the standard guide, of each of the standards guides, and they often appear in questions in some strands, and in some strands they better appear as statements for what students will be doing. If you'll go to the next slide, we'll break down how this appears for each of the grade bands. Perfect. So in grades K through 2, the focus of those notes is on the key elements of the grade level standard, because it is important when students are obviously just starting out with that standard to really know the initial steps of what they need to be doing to progress to the incredible rigor of each given standard. And then once they go into grades 3 through 5, the notes identify the level of rigor in the cornerstone that students are building toward as they progress through grade levels. So the notes change a little bit and really focus on rigor in grades 3 through 5. In grades 6 through 12, the notes continue to explain that rigor, but they also talk about the full scope of practices that are included within each given standard. And that's critical in those upper grade levels because students really need to be moving closer and closer to the full scope of what all is included within that standard, as well as the level of rigor. So once we move past the cornerstone notes, we are looking at a little bit more of breaking down the grade level standard itself. So the guidance underneath those cornerstone notes really focuses on things such as which part of the standard appears for the first time at this grade level. So there may be some similarities to previous grade levels, but there are often elements that are unique to a given grade level. And so teachers in particular would want to know what they need to make sure is captured at this grade level because students have not interacted with that particular element of the standard prior to now. There may also be certain notes about what students need to understand at the grade level, or what teachers need to understand about the standard at a particular grade level that is unique to that grade level. So underneath those notes, there would be some key information notes about the standard. And we're going to break down some examples of what these look like, because these notes really help teachers or other stakeholders to understand the various things that we talked about previously in terms of overlap with other standards, or key elements that they need to understand with the relationship between this standard and a similar standard in another strand, or something along those lines. And here are some examples of those types of notes. So in terms of clarifying notes, you can see the first example there is the Foundational Literacy Standard 6 at the 4th grade level. The note that appears for that standard is in grades K through 5. Standard Foundational Literacy 6 serves as the precursor to standards Language 1 and Language 2 in grades 6 through 12. So that's important for teachers to understand, especially in grades K through 6 and in or K through 5 and in grades 6 through 12, the relationship between the foundational literacy standards and how they build into the language standards in the upper grade levels. And then the second example there is Reading Informational Standard 8 at the 8th grade level. Talks about how the term claims, although it's often used broadly in kind of common parlance to statements of truth by an author, that in this particular standard, it should be interpreted only to be referencing statements of truth in an argumentative text. So it really clarifies for teachers that this standard only applies to argumentative texts in the upper grade levels. So other kind of unpacking the standard type notes. And this is where I talked about distinguishing among similar standards. One of the key areas that we often ran into of overlap, frustration of understanding, et cetera, was the relationship between Reading Informational Standard 3 and Reading Informational Standard 5. And so you can take a look there at the cornerstone, which again captures kind of the heart of each of those standards. In Reading Informational Standard 3, students are analyzing how and why the text elements, which are the individuals, events, and ideas within a text, how those text elements develop and interact over the course of a text. And then in Reading Informational Standard 5, students are analyzing the structure of text, which is how those text elements are organized. So in Reading Informational Standard 3, they're analyzing how and why they develop. In Reading Informational Standard 5, they're analyzing how and why they're organized in a text. So you can see those are pretty close to each other, and there can be some confusion there. And I'll demonstrate in the next slide how we address that. So the note of clarification provided is that the cornerstone standards are very similar. That standard Reading Standard 3 focuses more on how the elements of a text relate to each other and contribute to the meaning or purpose of a text. And then standard Reading Informational Standard 5 focuses more on the significance of the sequencing / ordering or the placement of text elements. So again, there's overlap there, but we need to provide a distinction. This gives kind of a visual of what we're aiming for here. So the clarifications, because previously they were basically just a circle, there really wasn't a clear understanding of how they were separated. And the goal is not to completely separate them, because again, all of these are integrated. There's going to naturally be an overlap of standards. The goal is to provide some separation so that we ensure that what is unique to each standard is not lost in that overlap. And so it's just to ensure that we capture what is unique to each standard. And here, another visual that specifically captures what I was simply describing a moment ago, which is the Reading Informational Standard 3 addresses how those text elements develop and interact. And then Reading Informational Standard 5 addresses how those text elements are sequenced or ordered within a given text. And so again, there's overlap, but there is uniqueness to each standard. So that was the first column, the unpacking the standard notes. The second column addresses what we were talking about in terms of the challenge of understanding specific words and phrases within each standard and the importance of those for a given standard and what that looks like in instruction and specifically in conjunction with high quality materials. And so we'll talk about a couple examples of these in the next slide. So you see here, just listed, I won't read each of these out for you, but it gives you kind of a snapshot of how we'll define a phrase such as word relationship, which can be a little vague when you simply just come up on it. So you want to know specifically, what does that mean within a given standard? Point of view for Reading Informational Standard 6 is one of those that is often confused with the term perspective. And so we provide some clarification there. And then the term points in Reading Informational Standard 8, which often can be confused with the term claims. And so we provide some support there as well in the definition for that grade level. And then finally, in the last column, this is where I was talking about earlier, where we provide example classroom tasks. And again, this is really designed to give each stakeholder a snapshot of how this could look like in a reading task, for example, in a speaking and listening task, or in a writing task. And you'll see there's always connections between these because those are really designed to build into each other, right? We want students to be reading a text and then talking about that text and then writing about that text. And so this is designed to give an indication of what that looks like for a given standard. Okay, so thinking about usage of the standards guides, we've really broken down the purpose and what the design of the standards guides are. Now we're looking at usage for each of the stakeholders, right? And that, again, includes parents that are supporting their students' learning. You see that at the bottom of the graphic here. But I really want to highlight at the top what the potential usage for EPPs, and that is to integrate the standards guides into coursework that is related to high quality instructional materials implementation, as well as the unit and lesson preparation and instructional rigor. And so we're really thinking about the standards guides as far as teachers go as being used within that instructional preparation process. So they're not designing lessons themselves, they're not unpacking the standards themselves. That work and support is being provided to them so that they can really focus on how can I teach the standards as they are laid out within the materials. And the guides are designed to help them understand the level of rigor that the materials are guiding students to do. And so if there is a gap, for example, that might be in a given standard within a given set of materials, the standards guides will help teachers understand how they might need to plug in that gap to reach that level of rigor that is needed. And then finally, thinking about what that looks like in the process and the various tools that are available. The key there is in a given lesson preparation session, we want teachers to have access to all of these tools, right? We want them to have the materials, of course. That's the fundamental thing that they are really digging into. And then there are a number of resources that help them do that. There's the Tennessee Standards document itself. There is the standards guides that I've been unpacking for you today. There is the unit preparation guide. There's the lesson preparation protocol. So each of these things are really designed to take the lesson planning piece and make that obsolete and really move toward a lesson preparation concept where teachers are really digging in and understanding how standards appear and progress in sequence within those materials. Yeah, for their locally adopted materials. And I believe that wraps it up for my portion. I will pass it over to my wonderful colleague, Gavernell Banks.
Hi, everyone. I am Gavernell Banks, and I will be sharing with you district family resources and the EPP landing page today. So I will briefly overview and introduce or reintroduce many of these resources. I strongly encourage you to check out these links and also share them with your pre-service teachers. So as they are entering classrooms and schools, they know what resources are available to them to share with families and also use to help them in their classrooms. The first resource is the district educator and community resources. They support families with reading. And so this page includes literacy resources for families and provides information to allow parents and caregivers to engage in their child's education. These toolkits include information to help understand, testing, activities to support literacy development at home, as well as key questions to guide conversations as parents and caregivers are meeting with their child's teacher. We also have the interactive decodable book series, and these decodables are available at no cost to families and educators to provide them extra reading practice at school and outside of school, and they can be accessed online. We also have the pre-K to kindergarten transition resource for families, and this resource provides simple strategies and tips, as well as links to games and things to help our pre-K and kindergarten students start school strong. We have the educator resources for supporting Sounds First learning at home. This resource provides strategies to support early literacy outside of the classroom. It includes phonemic awareness activities. And as we know, phonemic awareness is a skill that directly impacts a child's ability to decode and comprehend. So it shows educators how to work with families and give families the tools they need to work with these skills at home. It also includes model games and activities to build that sound awareness that students need to become strong readers. We also have the Sounds First videos, and these includes videos and games as well to for children to work with sounds at home. And they are model videos, so families can actually see what it looks like when they hear something like segment a sound or blend. They can see what it looks like in practice. Another resource that we have is the Family Literacy Nights Turnkey Package, and this provides districts and community partners tools and resources to host a family literacy night in a parent-friendly way. So it includes language that families can understand and use that to help with things at home as well. And we are also adding other toolkits for districts to have family nights. So as you get those newsletters, they will be linked there. And so we just strongly encourage you to check those out as well as we add other toolkits and turnkey packages. Here we have the Educator Preparation Provider resources for the EPP resources for ELA. And this is where you can find many of the things that have been mentioned today. We have the EPP literacy standards. You can also access the intellectual prep hub, the professional learning. You'll have the ERT, which is the early reading training, the secondary literacy training, as well as the advanced courses and modules, the EPP and district partnerships, where you can check out the framework and agreements, and also HQIM support. And that could be, all of those things can be accessed through this QR code. In here, we just linked the important resources that have been mentioned today so you can easily access those things. So everything that has been mentioned here, you can access this page and the links will take you directly to those things that were mentioned. So if you're interested in ELN 2.0, the ELA resources, the EPP resource page that was just previously mentioned, district resources for families, those interactive decodables can be found here, and also links to the asynchronous modules as well as the intellectual prep hub. Thank you.